miles is totally arbitrary. They take as much as they want.
Yeah, 'cause I was gonna say like 80,000 miles. Because like the circumference of the Earth is only 25,000 miles, so you could circumnavigate the Earth
Yeah.
3 times with 80,000 miles.
Yeah. So
Like you,
it's just so you feel like you have
right?
a lot, but you
Exactly.
don't actually.
That
I
is
probably have one round trip to Tokyo and back, enough for one, maybe. Probably not even. So what do you want
that's
to talk
dope,
about?
man. Well, let's see here. I was fascinated with this. Well, so we talked about the Vonage manuscript before. That was really cool. And if the Urantia book, am I pronouncing it correctly? Is that how you say it?
I call it the
Urantia?
Urantia book.
Urantia. Okay, all right. Um, if that you're saying that is similar to the Vonage manuscript, but it's real.
That's what I'm saying. So
Can you elaborate?
should I start? Okay.
Because
Okay.
yeah, that's what I'm suggesting. I'm ready for this.
It's seems very well. It's impossible to judge its authenticity of origin. Well, physically impossible. But with your own critical mind, it's impossible to judge the authenticity the authenticity of its claims that it's a distinctly other document, a distinctly alien document. You just have to read it and judge for yourself. And so it's 2,000 pages long, and it's in the strangest vernacular. The tone of it is metallic and alien and very awkward. It's written in a very awkward voice. Its clarity of thought is pristine, and its inner coherence of concepts is immaculate. It lays out a cosmology of concepts with the first intro, I guess, and then proceeds to expound upon it and give you this unbelievable amount of detail and depth for 2,000 fucking straight pages, with words it makes up on its own when it has to, with concepts it makes up on its own when it has to, but it's completely coherent and consistent within itself, and written in a voice that's just like super awkward and jarring, like I said. That takes like it takes a while to sink in to the way it tells you things. And even then, the information is so dense and so uh, not immediately relevant to anything human and in the 21st century, that it does literally take like 5 years probably to read the whole thing from front to back. Um, but it does present itself to me as a legitimately other document that has somehow made its own instantiation into our culture, uh, seemingly by itself. Um, how it apparently got made is
I was gonna ask.
yes. How it apparently got made was a friend noticing a guy would, or maybe his wife noticed that this guy would talk in his sleep. Very clear, long essays he would perform in his sleep out loud. And so a few friends started like got permission from him to be around him while he slept and take down what he wrote. And that sort of formed a weekly or monthly tradition of this club of people who would gather around this guy and take down the essays he dictated in his sleep. Um, and so the essays assembled themselves into about 2,000 pages total, with a linear, super cohesive narrative with an outline. It outlines itself at the beginning, and calls itself the Urantia book, and says it's written by an assortment of angels that I guess whichever angel is writing that specific essay takes over this man's sleeping body and uses his mouth to dictate.
So he's like, oh, 666, I can be Lucifer. Is it like that kind of thing, or is it like more like a channel, like sort of like a John Dee style, like strings of random numbers and letters, like
No, it's a very clearly, often beautifully written book that tells a story about the cosmos and our place in it, and tells a story about Christ and about Satan, and the true story of how that went down. Tells a story of how tells a story of human destiny, I guess, and portrays a universe of radical order and a vast dispersed system of inhabited planets that all are mediated by a divine order giving force that is putting everyone through school to become perfect, even as I am perfect, to quote the Bible. So it purports to be the next Bible, like the clearing the record on all the distortions that came with the Bible, and saying what an angel actually is, saying what
right.
Christ actually is, saying what Satan actually is, saying what God actually is.
I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that this book has probably been denounced by your local evangelical church. Is that a fair assessment? Because is this like the Da Vinci Code, except it's actually purporting to be a replacement for the Bible?
It purports itself to be a complete replacement of the Bible. I don't think any given evangelical Christian would even notice the Urantia book, or like have the even like attention span to even like read more than a few chapters, because most people literally can't have the patience and the curiosity to read more than a few chapters.
So this is not a work of popular literature.
No. It's it was dictated in the 20s.
Oh, it's old. Wow.
And maybe it was published for the first time in the 40s, maybe. At the very latest, it was published for the first time in the 60s, and it sold like 700,000 copies at this point, maybe. And it had its biggest heyday in the 70s, amongst other strange new age works like the Jane Roberts books I've talked about.
Yeah, I was gonna make it draw a connection to those Jane Roberts books, similarly being channeled works of literature.
And just glaring examples of the mutant element loose in our physical dimension, uh, showcasing abilities of the unconscious that we have no present labels for.
That's fascinating. So is it like, does it have any relationship to like sci-fi, or is it purely a work of like, because if it was written in the 20s, and it's talking about like the physical universe, the physical cosmos, when was it that like science discovered that there was actually other galaxies in the universe? Because I think that like that was around the same time that the astronomers realized that certain stars in the sky were actually collections of different stars called galaxies. And there was a question for a long time of how far away these things were that we were looking at. And so I
Yes.
wonder if it being channeled in that zeitgeist affected the content in a sense that it's like dealing with the shattering dawning of awareness, the shattering awareness that you're this droplet suspended in a vast ocean of reality. Um,
Okay, so there might be something to that. It might have, from its point of view being we are a collection of better aliens that are responsible for the maturation of the human race.
yeah,
And now they have telescopes and are seeing into the cosmos for the first time.
yeah,
And so now's the time to uh, give them a perspective on what they're seeing.
yeah.
Mostly its ability to tell stories that have nothing to do with the planet Earth and our drama at all is like radical. But it does, when it does point out physical, when it is explaining purely geographical aspects of where the planet Earth is and where the Milky Way is and where the greater group of galaxies is that the Milky Way is in, it it sometimes points those things out in terms of like, and you can see that area from your telescopes already.
Oh
Like
wow.
you can already see that far in, and that's what we just described of this neighborhood with this name that the book makes up. You can already see that. It does say also about the expanding universe theory hypothesis that it's literally not expanding. It just is so vast, and where we're at gives us such a specific slice of what we can physically see that we're getting the appearance of everything moving away from itself at increasing speeds. But that's only one slice of the neighborhood, and that's only one slice of time in a expanding and contrasting breathing movement that it says the greater spatial universe is constantly doing.
Well, it's really fascinating to, as a thought experiment, take literally the possibility that the Urantia book was in fact dictated by extraterrestrial beings. Um, it's actually one potential. It's not really incompatible with the Fermi like idea of like the Fermi paradox. Where basically is kind of the question of like where is everybody? Where are extraterrestrials? Why haven't they shown up? Why haven't they landed on the front lawn of the White House? That kind of question demands an explanation. One possibility is that we are alone in the universe. The other possibility is that we're not, just logically, right? So if we're not, then one would suppose perhaps that aliens are waiting until humans are ready for one type of consciousness or another. So yeah, I don't know.
Well,
If you were an alien, I'm just saying, if you were an alien civilization, it was entirely possible that you would have a very deliberate mode of injecting um, information into a society, and you would do so with some kind of weird channeled book like that. Um,
and it says that Christ was one of those actions.
mm. So they've been managing almost like in an ecological preserve
Yes.
um, human beings. Uh,
Yes.
that's I don't know. There's a part of me that finds that notion deeply comforting, and I think it's the same thing that makes people want to believe that there is a kind of ordering, rational force at the top of it all. It's something that makes me suspicious um, of that idea because it's appealing to me. And it reminds me of something that Terence McKenna said when he was on some riff about um, how people like, people come up with conspiracy theories, and like even the craziest, most far out people are missing the point. Because there's people who believe in the lizard people, there's people who believe in the mole men, or that flying saucers are coming down and abducting people and stuff like that, and that the world governments are part of some big cabal to, um, like it's like satanic or something like that. But I think the point that he came down to was that really the metaphysics, or not the metaphysics, but like the view that is crazier than them all is the idea that no one is fucking in charge. That um, there really is this completely alien, unbounded, unstoppable process, and the train is careening off the cosmic rails, and that is kind of scary. If no one is fucking in charge, there's some part of it that is terrifying. I mean, I think if you go deep into it, there's actually a certain another type of um, constellation in that idea of ultimate cosmic potential and risk. But there's a sort of local minimum in people's emotional reconciliation with this question, and then that local minimum is represented by some type of image that purports to assign a kind of personage to the narrator of the world, the narrator of reality. And it can be aliens, it can be Jehovah, um, or it can be any number of other deities. And sometimes it's like a fractal, or sometimes it's like a huge constellation where there's like different sub deities that collectively play the role of being like the orchestrator. But so I don't know. I guess I'm just keeping that in mind. That like this book is in some sense a reflection of that human psychological tendency to want to suppose agency, even in like the most large scale universal physical processes. And like, I mean,
Okay.
mhm.
Um, we could only grant the Urantia book as a creation of our unconscious to meet our needs to feel held and in a place of order.
Mm,
And it would still be one of the most important documents purely as that. Um,
right.
because if if you it's the same that it's presenting to me itself to me right now. It's the same kind of principle as the simulation theory. Given infinite time, given infinite planets, given infinite chances for civilizations to advance, um, there's going to be free will beings who sense a senseless universe and create order to compensate for that, because that's their power as free will beings. And so if that's probable, then that's inevitable. And so even if we're the first planet to face the question of if there's meaning or not, then given eternity, we're going to discover that our survival depends on making there be that greater order. Whether there was order there or not before we got here, we have to live and thrive. So we're projecting a universe of radical order that is maximally generative of creating more consciousness.
That's fascinating. It's almost as if, so from that cosmic eternal perspective, where you have innumerable free-willed beings trying their damnedest to expand and iterate and manifest their vision, it's almost as if it implies something about the connectivity of the past and future, where one has to suppose that the ultimate future state of our reality as humans, um, in some sense, maps onto the necessary initial state of the world that or the reality that we find ourselves in. Like, if you try to think of the end state, the future attractor, the final sort of like object at the end of time, if humans don't destroy themselves and do continue into the future, whatever it is that we build, um, that kind of from if we're in an infinite time space, that kind of has to be the starting condition that we're already living in, another version of it.
See,
Be-
we're gonna fucking get to that object at the end of time.
yes.
That's what we need to be thinking about right now. Because guess what we're gonna find when we get there? We're gonna find a fucking hot dog stand or something. And we're going to be then faced with our dire need to create a meaningful transcendental object at the end of time so that we don't fucking go insane.
Because so like we find heaven and we're disappointed that it's like a hot dog stand.
And we
Is that
realize
what you're
it's
saying?
yes, and we realize that it's completely on us to make a meaningful universe. No one's going to do it for us. That's our responsibility as free will beings.
I feel like there already is a meaningful universe. The universe is fucking full of meaning. Um,
I mean, meaning centered around you.
oh, it's human-centered me. Yeah, centered around you personally.
Yes, and a universe of meaning that is supportive of you and taking you somewhere.
Right. It's like if the tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound? I think the best way to think about that question is to be like, well, instead of trying to answer that question, I'm going to kind of sort of question the premises of this question. One of the premises of this question is the use of the word sound. What is a sound? It's vibrations in air, but it's also an experience in someone's brain. And so by using the word sound, by asking the question, does a tree fall that falls in the forest make a sound? You could rephrase that as, if a tree falls in the forest, does it create a system of air vibrations in human brain that, from a perspective of a human, is what a sound feels like? And the answer is, of course, if there's a human. But if you take a human
Yes,
out of the picture, then you logically undermine the question and really have no business asking it, unless
right.
you just like to fuck with yourself. So from that perspective, where you think about human beings as a necessary ingredient in any kind of reality that's going to be defined in necessarily human terms, the future attractor that humans are creating is in some sense an internal structure, in the sense that humans are a necessary part of the definition of what that structure looked like. So like the height of human experience, the potential for a human being to reach some kind of transcendent conscious state, or to create something in the world, to manifest something in the world that is deeply meaningful to a human, um, which one supposes the object at the end of time is meaningful, if nothing else. So we're almost like building kind of like a little nested universe, where if we escape into the future, we we're just one more link in the chain. So, I mean, people say like maybe simulations like they're kind of nested within each other. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And that's pretty
That's what I feel is true.
Me too. um, if forced to accept simulation theory, I think that it has to be structured that way, because in a way, actually, if you just look around, you can see a bunch of nested simulations already. There already are a bunch of nested simulations. It's called like biology. you know, Biology is a bunch of nested simulations. You have like inside of a cell has an internal environment to where the specific coding of DNA and RNA and stuff like that interacts with a specific symbolic relationships between not only to itself, but also to its environment, through the mechanisms of the type of proteins that it codes for. That's a computation occurring. So cells are little computers, bodies are computers, ecosystems are computers, ecosystems are markets. A market is a computer. Um, and so you have a bunch of nested computers already. You have a bunch of nested software that composes reality, but I think it's so it's really not a question of, is simulation theory true? It's really all you're really asking is, are we the top level simulation?
Yeah.
That's how you can rephrase it. That's the more sensible way to say it. And I think that's an open question. I think there's two ways of looking at it. Like maybe we are the top level simulation. Maybe we're not. I don't think either one of those is obvious. It's not obvious to me which that is, because the thing that the not being the top level simulation has going for it is this idea that humans have continually and repeatedly mistaken themselves as the center of the universe throughout time in different forms. Like Earth's the center of the solar system, man's the animal of
Right,
the
right, right.
yeah, this whole like tradition in science of thinking you're special and then progress being represented by the process of admitting that you're not special, that we're a small planet on an ordinary galaxy and the um, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy way of looking at the universe, where it's like this kind of arbitrary thing. So that's one thing. I mean, so from that perspective, to me it seems that maybe we're maybe not the top level simulation because we're not special. But on the flip side, maybe we are because we're conscious, and maybe there's something like God wants to be at the top level simulation because that's where the maximum power is located, because it's the thing that's pushing into the unknown, it's pushing into the void. It's the interface between the void and then reality that's been constructed since the Big Bang. um you know
Well, maybe there's further stages of order above our level.
right.
Um, one of my more basic tenets, one of my first principles is that one can only perceive one's own constructions. So,
Whoa, interesting.
so if we're going, and in the scientific process, that means you have to throw hypotheses out into the unknown to see what hits back. And the kinds of answers that hit back are determined in large part by the language you use to craft your hypothesis. So, discovering the universe is a matter of honing better and better and better questions, not necessarily of finding better and better answers. Um, so, if you're granting that you can only perceive your own constructions, then if you want to discover if there's higher levels of consciousness and higher levels of will, uh, you have to try on hypotheses of that being true and see if it hits with anything. And well, I view something like the Urantia book as the other being present right here. And Lex Friedman's attitude about the Tic Tac UFO comes up in my mind of if we find something, someone was just poking through the window, mean
Don't mind.
photo bombing you. Um, if we find something that defies our explanations, we owe it to ourselves, we owe it to the human race to explore that. And the Urantia book is like a straight up Voynich manuscript, just staring us in the face, um, defying us to explain it. And so I think it's important for me to fucking read it. Um, and I've read it twice, and I'm reading it a third time at the moment. And it it forces your rational mind outside of your box. It forces your scope of focus outside of your life, outside of the planet's life, and forces you to think in radically enlarged terms. And I think it's silly to read that book and craft your whole life out of it. It's for me, it's just one piece of a mosaic of experiences, but we owe it to ourselves to approach the unknown voluntarily. And the more unknown it is, uh, the more dangerous it is, but the more crucial it is for you as a human to explore that and somehow integrate it into a rational, productive view of physical reality.
Well, if one were a geologist and you were out and you're outside and you found the cliff that had a bunch of different types of rocks embedded in it, that had a bunch of different types of geological features, you might look at like a little rock and you go, this rock tells a story if I know how to look at it. It kind of has embedded in it some history, some information, some conclusions about the past and the future. And um, that's a geological process. And so it's really easy to be like, oh, yes, it's a natural artifact I'm holding in my hand that's kind of giving me some insight into the universe if I have the right kind of questions. Um, the Urantia book, though I have not read it, from the way you describe it, it sounds like it's like, I mean, it's any production of literature is an artifact, and even like in a naturalistic sense, it's an artifact of human culture, and human culture is based on human psychology, which is based on biology, which is based on chemistry, which is based on physics, and um, so you're kind of from like an epistemological, not epistemological, what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, I guess epistemological perspective, um, rocks and things like the Urantia book are distant cousins in the evolutionary tree of layers that have kind of built on top of each other. Like a rock is physics, but there's a whole other chain of increasingly abstract and conscious processes that are resulting in a similar type of artifact. So that's the perspective that I look at it from, and that I think that you're describing when you're saying that you need to approach something with a kind of open-minded curiosity and consider it to be a mosaic in the way that you look at the world. That
One
you don't
piece in my
right.
mosaic.
Yes, because you wouldn't you wouldn't fixate on one other aspect of the world if you were trying to understand what was going on. And it's important, maybe just useful perhaps even to just look at the human cultural artifacts in the same general perspective that you look at everything else and go like, well, this is a phenomenon. It doesn't really make sense to ask, was it lying to me? Because you're really giving it too much. You're putting it in a special category from other things when you do that. You don't go around being suspicious of other types of art or evidence or something like that unless you think that there's a human intention behind them that has its own agenda. Something like literature, once it's out in the world, um, projects a kind of potentiality onto all the people who it comes in contact with, because it's a kind of process that is an artifact of human psychology that is seeking to reintegrate itself into the sphere of human psychology, which is where it came from. So it's
Yes.
almost like a little virus or something that's like trying to find a complementary piece of information receptors that it can bind and reproduce. So
Yes. And I
there's
am I am one of that book's hosts for sure.
exactly,
And
precisely.
to the extent that I want that specific germ to spread, it's incumbent upon me to create a fruitful, fulfilling, generative, a really meaningful life, so that it has the greatest case in the form of my life for the worldview it represents.
Okay, so something just blew my mind right now. You know how there's like different weird kinds of fungus and stuff, where like some kinds of fungus are like rather ordinary, like those little white mushrooms you buy from the store. And then like on the extreme end, there's like the kind of fungus that glows in the dark and like infects ants' fucking brain to make them do weird shit.
Yes, like cordyceps.
Cordyceps, yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Um, and there's probably a bunch of other weird fungus that we don't even understand what the fuck it's doing. So what if we've actually, despite all these weird types of funguses we think you know about, what if we've yet underestimated how fucking weird fungus is, and that animals are themselves a kind of weird fungus that's become disconnected from the ground, and that we're ultimately kind of like a body that's like, well, so you know how like fungus creates like has like a mycelial network, and then it has like a fruiting body. The mycelial
Yes.
network goes through the universe and tries to project itself as far as possible and react algorithmically to its environment. But ultimately, beyond this kind of algorithmic expansion, there's a kind of destiny that when that algorithmic expansion of that network reaches a certain level of development, it does something so unpredictable, which is create this strange structure that is very unique and is almost like a statement of that thing's entire reality. Like all the funguses look the same before. They look like they were just
Right, right.
small little networks that were spreading through. And you don't know the true nature of it or the true purpose of it until you see it fulfill its destiny, which is to create
In a
a
fruiting
fruiting
body.
body. And a fruiting body creates spores. And so there's this coupling between reproduction and destiny that reveals the specific like grace almost of a particular type of, or like the nature, the identity sort of the special, the thing that's like a statement of something's actualization. Um, so I don't know. I was going to kind of try to connect that to this idea of becoming like an animal. You're really just like your destiny is just to become a host, kind of.
What I'm thinking of next is Terence McKenna has this radical confrontation with fungus and
Right.
has this radical integration of a conscious human mind with fungus.
Yeah.
And is his hypothesis true that the fungus could be a consciously willed being, independent of form, but instantiating itself in the third dimension as a mycelial network? Um, Whether or not that hypothesis is true, what's more objective than that right now and more mind blowing than that is the human mind's ability to entertain that as a possibility and then create a brand new reality based on the idea of what if that was true. Like,
Yeah.
does does the psilocybin producing mushroom have a galactic plan for eternity? Um, that matters less than the human mind's ability to imagine that that's true and then speak in English of and give a manifesto of what the mushroom is saying. Like the human mind is infinite in that ability. It can imagine what if a tree could talk, and suddenly in the human's mind, to the extent that it takes that thought experiment seriously, it will now hear a voice speaking in the voice of the tree, giving the tree's point of view. And
Yeah.
did that point of view exist before a human had that thought experiment? Well, it exists now.
So new realities are therefore premised on the liberty of making assumptions about things and considering those assumptions as part of reality and seeing how that plays out.
Yes, and again, we can only perceive our own constructions. And so
Yeah.
if
Mm.
we want to know what a tree's point of view is like, at some point we're going to have to use our imagination and talk in the voice of a tree and make human metaphors uh, to understand anything about what the tree is doing. We talk about the tree's roots and in terms of uh, positive sum arrangements it makes with fungi. We talk about things that the roots do in terms of food and water and nutrients, with no idea of if the tree's point of view even knows about food or cares about nutrients or is aware of the mycelial network that's coexisting in a positive way with its roots or not. Those are all basically human metaphors that we're applying to it to understand it at all.
Perhaps the Urantia book is aliens attempting to apply their metaphors to us.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So the thing I was going to say was that I've just really happy that on this podcast we finally connected the idea of aliens and literature. Um, and it feels like a great achievement because we've been on sort of separate aliens and literature threads that have been going for a while, and now it just feels like they're connected. So, all right, that's it. We can
Maybe this is my last thought on it. Maybe,
okay.
probably not. But regarding the authenticity or inauthenticity of something like the Urantia book or Jane Roberts books,
Mhm.
I get to create a life informed by those things. And by doing that, I'm now injecting the other voluntarily into human culture. And so, is it true or not? I'm true. And the life I've created by believing in it is going to have real effects. And so, the other is here right in front of you in the form of my existence by voluntary choice. And what a cool ability of consciousness that one can do that.
Well, you know how you know if something's true? If it has the ability to walk up and punch you in the face, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's the thing about truth, is that it's not. It doesn't depend on you,
Yeah,
really.
yeah.
So, yeah, existing. Just existing is definitely a way of proving something. Um,
Well, truth, like this chair I'm sitting in is a truth. This conversation we're having right now is a brand new truth. Um, as free will beings, um, we get to create new truth and give those new ingredients to culture. And that's all culture is a collection of new positive additions to the fabric.
well, you don't have to admit that something's true unless you depend on it in some way. That's kind of, I think, what's going on is because you can go your whole life and you can fail to realize certain truths about how the rest of the world is, but they don't affect you can still live your life and not die physically, even if you are completely unaware of the larger patterns of what's happening in your own life. You can just eat and drink. You don't have to think about yourself. You don't have to think about any kind of higher level construction of of who you are. Um,
I'm not
but
sure I agree with that. Go ahead.
well, what part? Why don't you agree with that? I'm curious.
If you're going to live and eat and drink, you do have to think about higher order systems because you have to think. You don't have a dope camouflage system to be safe from predators. You don't have teeth and claws that can kill other beings. The tool we have is our rational mind and our ability to think higher order abstractions.
Yeah.
And if you are subsisting, just not doing anything and just eating and drinking and living, it's by grace of people who have used their rational mind to provide you with shelter and food and water.
Yeah, there's something unique about being humans that our evolutionary path has boxed us into having rationality be a necessary part of our life and reality and
Yes, you have
environment.
to think. You have
Right.
to make voluntary choices.
Sure.
If you don't, then you are dependent on other people who do.
Sure. But to the extent that, I mean, of course, that's true, just logically. Um, suppose I was thinking more about, I guess, just there are some things that you don't have to contend with, though.
Like the
Um,
Urantia book, yeah.
exactly. You could go your whole life and be a perfectly successful citizen, having never delved into those deep waters. But for the person who does, yeah, maybe you'll find something in there and you can dredge it out and patch, use that artifact to build whatever it is you're building. Well, your life. That's what you're building. So,
I suppose it's practical for me in a career sense to explore these ideas
yes.
because I need models of development that I do not see in my peers
Oh
and in the
yeah.
people who've gone before me. Um, if I want to if I want to achieve a career that improves upon Beethoven, then I need some sort of role model that's more than Beethoven.
You need an injection of alien mutant stuff. That's what you
And
need.
if I can't find such a thing, I'm gonna create it myself.
You're the fruiting body.
Yeah.
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 Oh god damn it. Fruiting body is a cool name for something. Shit.
It's certainly a jam band's album title.
Fruiting body. Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Um sounds
So
cool.
let's see. I'll pick something out of our prompts here. Um, I suppose we should get into your exploring the concept of wabi sabi.
I'm not prepared to explore that at the moment. I was gonna do some more research on it, but no, let's skip that one. Let's push that to next week. I really want to talk about that, but okay. Well, I'll just say the thing that made me think of it,
Sure.
um, so that way we can. Hold on, let me go back to this note real quick. Uh, oh yeah, it was this funny thing I read on the internet. I'm just gonna read it because it's funny. The year is 2050 and your dingy old toaster has finally given up its last crumbs. You hop onto Amazon in hopes of finding a suitable replacement as there's no longer any box stores you can travel to. Dumb appliances have been phased out and newer internet connected appliances have taken over. It's better for the consumer, they claim. Not wanting an overly fancy contraption, you pick a no-frills unit that includes a touchscreen along the side. A few hours later, it arrives. Setting it up is almost as easy as your old one. Plug it in, enter your Wi-Fi password and a credit card to start up your free pro trial of the monthly subscription service that tweets at you when your toast is done. It says you can cancel at any time, but it requires a 5-day waiting period. It also requires access to your contacts. Tired and just wanting your toasts, you agree. You insert 2 slices of white bread and press the big red go button on the touchscreen. An electrical motor whines from inside the toaster as it begins to retract the toast into itself. There's a few seconds of silence as the toaster slowly heats up. While awkwardly standing there, you notice the touchscreen flickers and begins to display a buffering icon. An ad for "I can't believe it's not butter" begins to play. To make matters worse, you can't even ignore it by looking away due to a small, tinny-sounding speaker playing the company's jingle. This is your new morning routine. Um, Welcome to the future. So when I texted that to you, you had an unexpectedly strong reaction to it, and you said it was
Was it really unexpected?
depressing, and I thought it was funny, but because I don't think it's gonna come to pass. Okay, I realize I just spent like fucking 5 minutes reading that whole thing, but that will have to be a segue into the discussion of the Japanese aesthetic of wabi sabi, which you know how like in certain logical proofs, there's like this concept of like I think it's called like reductio ad absurdum, where like you take something to an insane you take something to its logical end, and then when you notice that that implies a kind of contradiction, it forces you to remove or modify one of your premises that you use to get to that point.
Okay.
And I think from an aesthetic standpoint, that's what's going on with this satirical example of like it's pushing to a logical extreme the kind of things that are considered good so that people can see how fucking disgusting they are, which then
Yes.
causes you to back the fuck up and go, what are we missing? And the shape, the puzzle piece, the outline, negative space that I perceived when I imagined when I did this backing up thing in response to what I just read was to perceive a certain shaped hole, and it's kind of a wabi sabi shaped hole. And how do I know that? Well, I really don't. But like I've been sort of fascinated by this idea of like a kind of flaw as an art form in and of itself. Um, like a distinct flaw that gives something character that in some way redeems it from this disgustingly over perfected kind of way of doing things. So I don't want to go into this right now because so the motivations for this are quite clear to me, but the specific content of how this aesthetic tradition fills this space, I don't want to speak out of line about that because then I would have to rewind everything I said next week. So we can just leave it. Sorry,
Well,
that was a sidetrack.
well, shit. Okay.
I'm sorry. If you have any meta comments about that, by all means, but I don't know.
That reducto addens absurdum, or whatever
Yeah.
the phrase is, taking the core tenets of a given thing and extrapolating them to their logical conclusion to show the relative validity of those core tenets or not is one of the more useful things Ayn Rand did for the free world by projecting the core tenets of communism to their logical conclusion and taking the base statement of from each according to his ability to each according to his need and created a literal world that adhered to that to the nth degree and showed what would happen if we all adopted that. And that's one of the things that happens in Atlas Shrugged is she projects a world that completely embodies that.
Mm.
And one of her mission statements of her entire life is to make sure that the USSR never happens again by showing how the core tenet of communism and collectivism creates massacre by its very code. And
Yeah.
it's a very powerful experience to read those things. Obviously, she always projects worlds that are cohesive in themselves that by her own definitions could only result in the result that she presents for you because
Mhm.
she created the rules in the first place.
She's
So
using it as a device to
so
illustrate
that's
something. Yeah.
that's a very obvious surface critique that you have to navigate when you are reading Atlas Shrugged.
Yeah. Um, I feel like Atlas Shrugged is one of the central attractors of um, your internal landscape that I can bring up something like that and you perceive a resonance with Atlas Shrugged. And I think that's probably also additionally, in some sense, a comment just on the nature of Atlas Shrugged itself, that it is such a general concept that it finds interface with disparate things. So yeah,
It's pretty fucking amazing
right.
how clear she made objectivism. How simple, how clear, how beautifully articulated and cohesive and completely relevant her system of thought is. And it obviously doesn't need anyone to subscribe to it. Like every new video on YouTube from the Ayn Rand Institute gets like 1,000 views. Like it's one of those truths that does not need your participation in it to continue growing in relevance and applicability and truth.
That's crazy. 1,000 views isn't really that much though. I feel like
That's what I'm
probably,
saying. Yeah, like
oh,
it doesn't need anyone to pay attention to it. It doesn't need to be trendy.
right. It's managed to stay around for a long time without having uh, being having trend being subsidized by trendiness or its meme value or its ability to get people to repeat it. It
And
kind
it's
of,
and it's
yeah,
only grown in relevance in my opinion.
yeah. Um, when you're at the beach and you see a wave draw back, it reveals the stones that are sitting there on the bottom because they're the ones that don't move. And so you see a very clear, distinct, contrasting image of the substantial aspects of a formerly swirling mass of sand and water and foam. You have like a kind of like it's like there's a kind of revelation in change, um, of revealing the foundational elements that you, as you said, don't need your understanding to exist. They're the pillars. And it's cool that we have like cultural artifacts like that. Again, just returning to this idea of like literature as a kind of like stone or something almost that is like
A Rosetta
underpinning.
Stone.
Yeah, and even like a foundation, like a structural stone,
Oh, a literal foundational block.
a load bearing structure, a stone upon which other things are premised. Um, yeah, even if they're premised in a reactionary kind of way, like Marx, industrial capitalism and Marxism. They're kind of both aspects of the same object in human history and civilization, um, and they're related. They're inextricably linked to each other, and they're inextricably linked to a particular process that has like produced the reality we're living in. And you can't remove one of those things from history without reordering a bunch of events.
Sure.
And yeah, I think yeah, there's like a personal analog to that. It's interesting to think about what are the stones in your life, what are like the pillars that you
Yes.
may not even be aware of. You seem to be more conscious of them than most people, of like objectifying your personal
Yes.
pillars of so
I've
yeah.
I've attempted to go through every single pillar,
Mm.
every single one, and examine it for the purposes of removing, improving, creating a new one, uh, specifically to meet my goals of being the best singing performer of all time, or and also to like live physically longer than other people have lived before.
Right.
So I've gone through every pillar that's motivated my actions, and that's an ongoing practice to over time become completely conscious of every reaction in my experience.
Do you think there's pillars lurking yet undiscovered?
Uh there must be, because there's hardships and achievements I have not yet accomplished, and
Yeah.
by reflecting on my most recent hardships and achievements and the new objective perceptions of my pillars that they illuminated, um, I'm going to go into bigger achievements than this. So they're going to show me bigger views of my pillars. Along the lines of that, I wanted to ask you, um, in general, about this van life summer, and imagining you literally out in the desert, coding, and the thought experiment is, what kind of person do you see yourself being on the other side of this summer, maybe, that you weren't before? Because this is like vast spans of solitude that you're voluntarily engaging in.
Well, I stumbled into this unconsciously in the same way that I always proceed into the future, which is by like just stumbling and then finding myself through very fortuitous events and circumstances exactly where I want to be. I didn't really think about being in that desert until I was in the fucking desert, and then it dawned on me. I was like, "Wow, this is kind of cool." You know what I mean? I got to see thunderstorms and shit like that.
Yeah.
Um, and it was really powerful. And I guess I don't know what kind of. I have to wait and see what kind of person I'll be on the end of it. I guess all I can say is that I do feel as though certain things are being stripped away from me. It's almost like a process of creation by reduction in a way, where
Yes.
like I'm just like chiseling out a statue where I just got a bunch of like sloppy stuff on the edges. But if you sit by yourself in the desert for a week, you get a little chisel off some shit that you just kind of drop.
The the standard by which you're deciding what to chisel off being what is going to help me program productively right now.
Right, because that's the specific kind of force and energy that I'm forcing through my pipeline of things. And well, it's a really weird example thing actually, but now I'm thinking of it. So being out there made like in some way actually started making me more in touch with my body, and I started realizing that I don't. Um, I'm usually kind of like not spending as much time outside as I was out there, and I kind of realized like there's not a lot of furniture for me to sit on, and so I kind of found myself like sitting down, laying, standing, and I started like stretching a lot
Ah,
because I was cooped up in the van. I'm kind of like working my computer, and I started to realize how much um, maintaining like physical limberness was a critical part of being able to work on the computer a lot. And
yes.
so I ended up watching this YouTube video about the Asian squat, and it was this video of this Japanese guy who like was like squatting down and like sitting there and like explaining like what the Asian squat was and like how to do it and like its place in um, physical health of like maintaining the ability of your body to kind of like rest naturally in the position that humans are supposed to be able to rest in the absence of chairs, beds,
Yes.
couches. And so, because like humans pretty much just are on flat ground most of the time, like that's our natural environment. So you can sit down cross-legged, which is natural position. You can lay down, it's natural position, or you can rest kind of on your haunches and be ready for action, but still relaxed. And that's like a intermediary position that we've just, as Westerners, particularly not, or really just like people who live in highly urban environments and stuff and are inside a lot, drive cars, don't do a lot. Um, and so I started doing that, and I couldn't do it at first, and I couldn't do it. But over the course of like 3 days, I stretched out and got enough balance to where I could comfortably sit down and rest on flat ground and just have my legs bent. And I like developed like flexibility in my ankles and my like thighs and stuff like that. And
Yes.
I realized like it was weird how when I stretched out my body like that, I almost perceived like a flood of new thoughts, mental space that kind of opened up in corollary with that physical stretching that I had done. And so, yeah, maybe I mean I think that's just one thing is like changing your physical environment will unpredictably alter your mental abstract space too. Um, so I'm gonna keep experimenting with that and just keep trying to live like a fucking animal. That's like just eat, sleep, and think about computer code. It's a pretty
As
and
an
you know,
animal does.
as an animal, no, as an animal does exactly because I want to. I want to admit that thinking about computer code is an animalistic activity. And our definition of animalistic activity
It gives you
is unfairly. Mhm.
granting that gives you access to your unconscious and your instinct
Yeah.
as a helpful adjunct in your programming.
Yes, I have an instinct to be doing what I'm doing, all of the things I'm doing. It doesn't matter that one of them is very complicated and not in common with other animals. That's not some fundamental truth. Animals do all kinds of weird shit. One of the weird shit that I'm doing is writing these symbols into a machine to make the machine do things. That's, there's birds that build nests out of mud. Okay, and they're fucking birds.
Yeah.
I'm a human being, and I can do all kinds of animalistic stuff, including very abstract things. But they're all linked together. They're there's instincts that are linked to your physical form as well. And just because we're creating new instincts doesn't mean you don't have to bring your body along for the ride, because ultimately your body is like a system that functions to actualize your your end goals, your instincts. I mean, what are instincts if not goals? Um, even from an animal's perspective.
The bird makes nests out of mud. The human makes these vast Atlantis-sized civilizations because our creations don't depend on space to
Yes.
expand.
They have a whole new dimension into which
So
they can grow.
so we don't make a nest, we make a castle, we make a community of castles, and
Yeah.
that's just one productive human.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I'm trying to really get with that idea. Um, I think by the end of this summer, um, I'll probably be really appreciating town life and autumn and stuff like that. So I'm just trying to live in the present, I think, and that's why it's weird to think about the future. But
The summer has this confrontation with physical reality built into it. I guess the other extreme does as well in winter, but the stress thematically with summer is with consciousness.
yes, in action.
Yes.
Yes. Hmm.
And so the mounting pressure of heat is metaphorically the same as maximal confrontation with your present moment and what you're able to physically make of yourself. And it's this theme is why I enjoy the superheated valley in Chico, where it gets up to 110 regularly here. Um, and I want the seasons to push me like that because that's my own mind pushing me to a brand new place. Like the changing of the seasons always is this traversal into a brand new psychological location that I've
Hmm.
never been before. And the earth itself is pushing me to greater achievement, even just in terms of temperature. I think it's awesome.
Make hay while the sun shines. The summer is
Yeah.
also associated with historically conquest. Like military campaigns would go out and fuck people up when it was summer, because that's when there wasn't ice and food was plentiful and the leaves were on the trees, and it's like this time of um, to kind of either yeah this I mean the summer, that's why I think a lot the summer maps to the heat of the day, whereas the spring maps to the cool of the morning, or in the fall is kind of like the contemplative evening, and
Yes.
the winter's night, obviously. So there's this. It almost seems it's so obvious that it seems dumb to even point that out, but there's this relationship between the seasons and the day,
And
and
there's a relationship between the seasons of our mind
exactly,
and the planet we're on.
that's where I was going with that. Basically, is that there's other iterations of this seasons analogy. That's just because it's talking about a cycle of rebirth, like, and to going under and coming out again, and like so. The peak of the summer is like the glory of life, which is the polar opposite of the anonymity of being dead and non-existent.
Yes.
So it's this wheel that keeps turning, and
And it's
yeah,
gonna, like my bike chain wheel analogy, it's just gonna turn on itself in a circle infinitely, giving you the opportunity to ride on it towards
yeah,
a trajectory of your own choice, but it's just going to spin pointlessly, endlessly, and it's up to you to make that a mode of transportation for your own goals or not.
you have to want to ride the Ferris wheel.
um, what
You
else?
gonna go?
Huh?
Oh, nothing. I was just gonna say something about the underworld, but let's no. Let's go to the next thing. Um, what do we got?
I wanted to talk about I guess I'm still probably backtracking again. I don't know. But one of my prompts this week was, are we living in a simulation?
Oh, I thought we already discussed this in
We
context
did.
of the Urantia
We,
book.
we did. But maybe first I just wanted to point out how funny it was for me to unironically type that in to our prompts.
Hey, it's a good question. Just because everyone's talking about it.
I know, it's such a good question, but it was almost impossible for me to unironically ask it because it's become
You know what?
so.
You know what my shoot from the you know when you texted that to me, my initial shoot from the hip reaction to that was no. No, we're not living in a simulation.
Yes, I think on that level, yeah, same.
Like that's what I want. That's my almost like that's my ethos speaking right there. It's not when I haven't gone into it and thought about all the possibilities and stuff, but my general attitude that informs what I want to say is that no, we're not living in a simulation because to me, I think that almost I guess I'm just reacting against this like sneaky idea that imagining that you live in a simulation gives you license for a kind of solipsism where you don't
Right,
have to take your own fucking life seriously because what does it matter, man? It's just a
right.
simulation. Bullshit. And so, yeah, in my deepest heart of hearts, yeah, I mean, totally could be a simulation. Am I going to live my life with that assumption? Nah, I don't
You
think so.
can't. You can't.
Because what's the
It's
point?
nihilism.
It's nihilism. It has high risk of nihilism, let's just say. And
So the uh, it occurred to me earlier in the conversation. One of my answers to that is the way the seventh Narnia book is written, and C.S. Lewis gives uh, this Revelations style of visionary parable of the end of the world and the human race proceeding to its next stage of spiritual development. And when we all are ushered to the next stage of responsibility and creativity, where we were before that transition is revealed to be less real than the level of activity we are now going to. And in the book, it's illustrated as nested wheels inside each other.
Mhm.
And our given third dimension experience being a hub of a wheel relatively on the outside and progressing to a more valid dimension of experience is us traveling on the spokes of the wheel to a hub that's now closer towards the center. And yet there's a psychological oxymoron that happens when they do that in the book, where they discover that that hub that's closer into the center of existence is many orders of magnitude bigger than the hub of the wheel on the outside that they were just expanding. And they see this vista of eternity when they're traveling to the next hub. They see that the closer into the center they get, the more space expands. So the absolute center is this infinitely large space to enact physical experience upon.
Well, Terence McKenna had a talk that was entitled "Nature is the center of the mandala," and I think it's what he was getting at, something like that. But I'm curious, how do you think that plays out? Does that mean that if you get closer to the center and you go into more general, more basic, more universal frames of mind, you're going to encounter an expanding volume in some sense? And what would that look like?
You're, in effect, you're going to experience a larger world because you are going to have more agency in that new world. as we become conscious of more and more of our unconscious reactions and processes, we now have volition able to be applied to more and more aspects of the physical experience. So, how large your world is directly a result of how much agency you have to productively and positively affect the world.
Yeah, like you're seeking to find new avenues and dimensions of agency, in vistas that you had not previously admitted to your reality. And that kind of, I guess that connects to what you were saying in the beginning, which was like your constructions are the only thing that you can perceive. The nature of your constructions is bounded by the kind of space that they're in. The space that they're in is a function of your perspective. So it seems that, yeah, I wonder, there's almost like a kind of like coordinate where a person is living, and one of those coordinates is almost like a radius. Maybe God is a zero radius being. It's, he's the axis mundi, the center of the mandala that everything kind of turns around, that never moves, that never changes, because it doesn't. There's kind of nowhere left to go. So would that imply like an infinite space? I can see why people associate infinite space with the center, because both of those things are theoretical extremes where you can go no further. When you reach the center of a circle, you can't get any more center than the center. When you reach infinite space, you can't get any more infinite infinity. So
Well, the
there's a dividing by zero kind of thing going on.
the Urantia book talks about that zero that is the God center as maybe it's the injunction itself to expand and grow and be of productive, helpful ability to the communities around, under, and above you. Be a positive voice in the choir. Uh, God is nothing more than the unchanging invitation to become better than you are now. And as such, he is eternally unmanifest. The moment the Urantia book puts it in three different spheres, where the first one is the eternally unmanifest injunction, and the next sphere out is the Son, not the Father, the spoken word, not the mind that conceives of what to say, but the spoken word itself is the Son. And and outside of that is the integrative principle of how that word meets with the world. And so the closer in you get towards the center, you get to you get to you get closer and closer in to your primal energy of being, and you experience presumably a faster and faster rate of helpful productivity. The clearer you are on the central injunction of your life, the more easily you're able to make new words out into the physical universe. But then making new words in the physical universe speeds up the central injunction to make words, and they reinforce each other. Like your ability to think of satellite.earth then motivated you to create it, but the creation of satellite.earth and reaching the archetypal completion moment with it is going to open up in a world of opportunity for you that's many magnitudes bigger than the world you experienced before it. But you and your center is now changed by having spoken the word of satellite.earth. And now there's like three more projects inside in your
Right.
center that are needing to be spoken into brand new creations.
Okay, so where I was going with that was that I had this image in my mind about kind of like how I was imagining how spaces from the outside look like objects. Um, so you were saying that by creating satellite.earth, I'm kind of creating a new realm of possibilities upon its completion, the archetypical completion. And when I had conceived of this, to me, it looked like an object. It looked like it's an artifact. It looks like I'm something I'm making. But it's only when something is completed that it enters into reality and you enter into it because it exists now that you find that objects are spaces when you enter
Yes.
into them. That there's a kind of momentum or power that objects have to create new dimensions that sort of depend on them.
Yes.
And the yeah, and so the kind of and the specific nature of an object predicts what kind of space it will be. Um, which of course is what design's all about, is doing that intentionally. Yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting way of looking at it. Kind of like, yeah, it's like what are the projects of your life? We talked about the pillars of your life, the assumptions, the thing you depend on. But what about if the pillars are the things that you depend on, that your life depends on? Maybe projects are kind of like the things that depend on you not giving up and are sort of like pillars in construction. And then when they're completed, they're foundational elements for new things, which is to say that they are a space. Um, they're like they kind of raise possibilities. I don't know.
Well,
It's so hard to imagine this because imagining it is the same thing as making it, which takes a lot of work.
the
Um,
it points out one of our pillars of what we need to thrive at the base of our psychology, and that is the need to enact projects that are challenging and meaningful. Um, and once you finish one, you have to proceed from there to make another one. Um, our need to do that is one of the pillars.
it's almost like that pillar is just kind of pushing through the ground, and we're standing at the surface, and its foundations are kind of embedded, and it's kind of like pushing upward. Uh, like there's the parable about like the elephant, and then there's the mouse, and like different parts of the elephant seem like different things to the different blind people that are like standing
Yes.
around, like one's touching the tail, one's touching the trunk. Yeah, I think it's something like that, to where there's a kind of process that's going on of reality forging, and we're a link in the chain, and so we have distinctly different relationships to the links that are on either side of us, because we look at that as like past and future, but really we're just embedded. And you know it's quite it's quite impossible not to be an embedded system. But yeah, I don't know. It's weird to think about, like, that you are kind of making, in a sense, a conscious choice to dwell on, like, which direction are you looking? You know what I mean? Are you looking east or west? Are you looking into the past, or are you looking into the future? Um, Metaphorically speaking, are you a person who is the stereotypical young person, to where all they see is what's ahead of them? Or are you the old person sitting in the rocking chair and you're not gazing at the void in front of you, you're gazing at your past? Um, it's, I think that, like, those are the two most common.
Yes.
The third most common is the old person who gazes into the future, gazes into the void. Um, that's like the mystic, the person who at any age is looking into the void.
Yes.
Some people are skipping, so I mean, and almost basically, and then on the other side of things is the child, the baby, who is looking at the void, but doesn't really have any words to talk about it yet, because they just came out of it. Um,
Is in a mode of pure perception.
Yeah, exactly.
Pure cognition.
Exactly. Um, so depending on which direction you're looking and what you're looking at and how big your frame of view, you're going to see pillars of the past or projects of the future in different ways. Um, but what is objective is your position, where you stand. You're the center of your own universe, and so yeah, I guess if you just stay on the ride, you'll get to a different place. That's the only thing you can really say about it. Is that if at some point you're going to look back at your projects and they're going to look like pillars to you, if you got that far.
Yeah. I the objectivity of our place in our awareness and
Mm-hmm.
the apparently universal human phenomena of being at the center of your universe.
Yeah.
Um, I've been more aggressively engaging Ayn Rand's concept that I was pushing at you with a few podcasts ago of the self-centered experience, um, putting your own self as your highest ideal, and her uh, her statement is that that's the most generative, most stable way of existing as a human, is to have your own self be held as your highest ideal. And what you need for fulfillment and meaning being the most important thing for you to enact physically. And in the course of engaging that more directly and sniffing out the parts of my experience where I put other people's experience higher on my hierarchy of action and meaning than my own experience. Um, and the concept stands out to me at this moment as a successful integration of metaphysics. It seems to make so much sense that if we are if the one thing we're objectively sure is being at the center of our own experience, then our ideals should organize themselves around that basic objective phenomenon. That's where our morals should come from. That's where our ideals should come from.
Yeah. So if you're like the axis of a wheel and you're at the center, you need to think about grease, bearings, stability, because those are the things that make a wheel function.
a new
Um,
a way it's been presented to me in new age terms from my hippie ass guru was
as opposed to mechanical terms, yes.
she said that we are each given a piece of existence, and no one is responsible for that plot of land except ourselves, and that has to be our first goal, is responsibility for this plot of land that is our body and the effect our body has. So in that sense, if you want to be contributing to the choir of existence in some exalted collectivist sense, it comes out to the same thing of you need to be your own highest ideal because no one else is responsible for your body except you.
What I was going to say was, I just want to make sure I wasn't breaking up before I said this because it was good. The um, like I think this is related to that idea of a of like the center being an injunction, where
Mm,
like what is that injunction? Well, you could interpret that as do this fucking garden thing. You know what I mean? Like an individual person. Like that to me, that doesn't seem like it's really. It's funny how that's like a hippie new age guru idea. Like it seems pretty obvious, right? Like no
yes.
shit, you have agency over your own life. That is where you start. It's the most obvious thing that everyone acts like. So it is. It's a pretty central injunction. Um, that and like even if you are busy outsourcing your moral code and responsibilities to other people, you're still doing that from your own center. It's just that the content of your center, the content of your garden is basically just other people's shit, but you still
You're
put it there.
you're doing
It's
it
not like anything, even,
you're doing it from an assumption that that's the morally best thing to do.
yeah, exactly.
And I
If your
and
plot of land is a garbage heap, well, you're just collecting garbage. You're like the
uh,
fucking crow that's dragging
you've
things into your nest.
you've been convinced somewhere along the line that that's the best way for you to be.
Probably, it's probably premised on just like a lack of gardening skills, and sort of like an unconfidence in your own ability to grow things without killing them.
Sure.
So you go and you just drag in a bunch of fake ass shit. You know what I mean? That, yeah, I like that metaphor. Um, I mean, ultimately, what we're doing, all this stuff we're talking about, is a reflection of what we are unconsciously valuing and striving for, which is, I suppose, to be a generative structure that does not fall apart, become distracted, quit, lose focus, die, and go in circles. Um,
Yeah.
like the outer surface of a wheel that's just getting flung around and is, in the what's like Dante's image, like just the eternally buffeted realms. You know what I mean?
Yes.
He was the first circle of hell or something. Like those, I feel like in a way that um, the in Dante's, the first circle, it's almost like the most believable version of damnation because it's most in line with people's basic felt experience of just being buffeted by life. And so when you dig just down a little bit into the surface of the underworld, you encounter this buffeting and this like warning that's like, don't go in this area. It's like if you're in a video game and you start straying to the edge of the map, there's like a force that pushes you back. You know what I mean?
Yes.
That kind of thing. It's something like that. Is when you start getting into um, the hinterlands, you're straying away from the place of maximum agency that you have. Um, and Yeah, I guess it's like that's kind of like why the injunction exists, is to give you kind of like a center point to orient yourself. And yeah, I don't know. It's quite interesting to think about how there's almost like, it's weird that we resort to geometric metaphors so much, but then I think, well, we're in good company because geometric metaphors have been at the center of many um, metaphysical kind of like ethos statements. Um, it's kind of hard to kind of conceive of like what metaphysics looks like without resorting to geometry. You're just talking about um, things that are really hard to describe. Um, but yeah, that's pretty much all I had to say on that. What else we got?
We're getting
You had
down
something else.
we're getting down to the dregs.
The highest. So I had the statement: the highest virtue is courage, the gravest sin, betrayal. And well, now I can't help but think of it in the context of what we just said, what we just talked about. So I guess I'll just do that. I think that part of it takes a certain amount of courage to try to create your little garden or do anything really. And so, due to the fundamentally experimental nature of being alive and existing and having to deal with the world and see what works, you have to have a certain willingness to face failure or get punched in the face with truth. And that's why, at the basic level, any kind of like moral injunction that anyone is going to formulate implies a kind of willingness. And I think at the end of the day, willingness and courage are kind of the same thing, just a willingness to exist, right? So it might not be the most dramatic or the most well developed or the most specific virtue, but I think it is the greatest, in the sense that it's the most fundamental or most basic virtue, is simply willingness. And so I was looking and I was thinking, okay, so I always do this thing where I think of this kind of theoretical dialectic where I go, if courage is the greatest virtue, then what's the greatest sin or vice or whatever? And I was like, well, is it like cowardice? Okay, that would be like the logical, rhetorical opposite. But that's not what it feels like to me because I don't think that God or the universe or whatever is out to like really fuck people up who don't try. I think it's more to me the universe feels like a fundamentally loving place that is attempting to encourage beings to do their best. And
Ah,
it can't succeed for you, but you know what I mean? Like, I think it's just like, to me, it's too depressing to conceive of a universe where people are held to account and judged and having to pay back shit. I think it's more of like, you try your best, you're probably going to fail, hope you don't kind of reality. Because that's what I see around me. When I look around, I look at the lives of animals and other people. I just see a bunch of people trying their best. And that's basically what I see. It ain't always pretty, but it's definitely well intentioned for the most part. I think nature is very well intentioned.
yes.
And it's like, yeah. So that is the thing that leads to this idea of betrayal that I had imagined. That I sort of like, if I was trying to think like, to me, what feels like the worst thing, and to me, betrayal feels like the worst thing because betrayal is kind of like a needless waste of a life, in the sense that you were kind of like you entered into some kind of contract or partnership or mutual manifestation of willingness with another being, and then you threw it away, not only for yourself but for them as well because they're
Yes.
leaning on you. So it's almost like the maximally destructive action, whereas
Yes.
willingness is the most fundamentally maximally necessary action. And I think maybe that's where I got that from. But yeah, that's pretty much all I had with that. I guess, yeah, I think my feelings about that are accurate. Um, the most I could never get over the guilt of betraying someone. I'd be perfectly capable of getting over doing all sorts of shit. I could
Yeah.
rationalize the shit out of anything. If I was going to become a thief or a bank robber, oh yeah, I could totally be like, I can already feel myself romanticizing how cool that is. You know what I mean? Or like, if I was going to become like a eco terrorist, I could be like, oh yeah, like this is like a lifestyle now, or like
but
I
but
could
you,
easily talk.
but you're partly
Mhm.
saying that there's a bank robber and that's a version of evil, but even more evil than that is the partner in the bank
Who
robbery
betrays his fucking friend.
that snitches on everybody.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yes.
And that's the person who to me, is the most unsympathetic character.
Yes.
There's no recourse for that. There's nothing you can say that will make that okay. Um, yeah,
Well, I think we're feeling finished here.
yeah, I am. That was a good way to wrap it up.